Welcome to the Humanities Team podcast with me, Steve Farrell. Humanities Team is an international spiritual movement whose purpose is to communicate and demonstrate the timeless truth that we are all one, with the divine and all life, caring for each other and the world we share, so that people's actions reflect this profound understanding within our generation. We believe that living this truth is essential to resolving the most chronic and acute world challenges and vital to creating a flourishing world of peace, harmony, and happiness. We offer transformative education programs in personal and spiritual development, and we host an annual event called Global Oneness Day. Similar to Earth Day, which galvanized the global environmental movement, Global Oneness Day has become a catalyst for spiritual activism and an integral part of the present-day global oneness movement, which represents a profound new paradigm in human culture. Humanities Team is the only global nonprofit organization working in transformational education. Since we are a nonprofit, there is no focus on growing profits or satisfying shareholders, and 100% of all revenue goes toward our work supporting conscious evolution, planetary awakening, and flourishing at every level of life. If you'd like to learn more about us or want to support our mission directly through donation or volunteering some of your time, please visit us online at humanitiesteam.org. And lastly, if you enjoyed this podcast, we'd be grateful if you'd leave us a review.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Kristen Vessa, the Senior Director for Humanities Team Conscious Business Initiative. I'm happy Global Oneness Day to you all. During the Conscious Business Evolution panel, we will hear from distinguished conscious business leaders about key principles and practices they have implemented to reinvent organizations. They have diverse backgrounds and areas of business expertise. You'll also learn about the Conscious Business Declaration and Humanities Team initiatives that recognize the interconnectedness of all of life. While business is the biggest source of some of the world's most challenging problems, it's also one of the greatest hopes and potential for solving them. Therein lies an amazing new conscious business model that creates prosperity and flourishing for all. To do this, it's essential for business to develop both the awareness, skills to consciously evolve their organizations. We're honored, very honored today to have with us some of the leading experts in conscious business. Ozioma Egwonwu, Dr. Lance Secretan, Marilyn Tam, and Raj Sisodia. I'm going to introduce you to the panel now. I'll introduce the panel members one at a time, and then we'll go right to questions. Ozioma Egwonwu is a best-selling author and internationally celebrated speaker, writer, teacher, transformational leader. She is the CEO of Burn Bright International, a global consultancy dedicated to helping individuals, businesses, and communities reach their full potential. Ozioma is the founder of World Dream Day, a global vehicle for empowering ideas, goals, and dreams around the world. Held annually on September 25th, World Dream Day continues to be a source of inspiration and activation for communities around the world. Welcome, Ozioma. Dr. Lance Secretan is one of the most insightful and provocative leadership teachers of our time. He is a former CEO of a Fortune 100 company, university professor, award-winning columnist, and author of 15 books about inspiration and leadership, and a recent memoir, A Love Story. Lance coaches and advises leaders globally and guides leadership teams who wish to transform their culture into most inspirational in their industries. Welcome, Lance. Dr. Marilyn Tam is a speaker, author, consultant, board-certified executive, corporate, and leadership coach, and founder and executive director of US Foundation. Formerly the CEO of Aveda Corporation, president of Reebok Apparel and Retail Group, vice president of Nike Incorporated, Marilyn is a successful entrepreneur and has developed and built 4 companies. From being a child laborer in Hong Kong to international business and humanitarian success, she is an inspiring example of what can be achieved if one follows their dreams. Brand Channel lists Marilyn Tam as one of the 4 most prominent names in ethical business globally. Welcome, Marilyn. Dr. Raj Sisodia is a thought leader and founding member of the Conscious Capitalism movement. Raj holds engineering degree, MBA, and PhD. He's a distinguished professor and research scholar. With John Mackey, he co-authored the book Conscious Capitalism and has a TED Talk called Reimagining Capitalism with Higher Consciousness. Raj has consulted and taught executive educational programs for a long list of Fortune 500 companies. Welcome, Raj. Once again, I'm truly excited about this panel. It's a privilege to be with each of you, and have the 4 of you together is really remarkable. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started with our discussion. I'd like to turn the mic over to our panelists to share a few minutes each how you would define conscious business and how you got started in conscious business. So we're going to start with Dr. Lance Secretan. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you. Good to be here. How did I get into this? Well, I used to run a company that today is the largest employer in the world. It's called Manpower. And I was there for 14 years. And when I left, I began teaching at university. And I read a lot of texts, and I thought all of them were off the mark. At least they weren't what I was doing and had been doing for all those years. So I wrote my own book, and it was called Managerial Moxie. It was back in the 80s. And it became a bestseller. And pretty soon I realized that I could not continue to teach because I couldn't carry my workload. But there was another reason. I was an adjunct professor, and I had about 60 students in my classes. I was teaching strategy and strategic leadership. And in the second semester, I had about 150 students. And then eventually I had 400 students in multiple classrooms with closed circuit TV. And then eventually I got fired because faculty, of course, did not like all of the people that were draining out of their classes to hear an interesting and different view of how business could be run. So the book became a bestseller, and clients started to show up and calling me and saying, can you help us do this kind of thing? So I've spent the last 25 years or so introducing concepts of conscious leadership and oneness, including in a book I wrote called One, The Art and Practice of Conscious Leadership. I certify people to come and study with me. We do that about 6 or 8 times a year. I have homes in Ontario, Canada, and in Colorado, and I move between the two. And I work with pretty large organizations and also small ones, healthcare systems and so on, government, to try and help bring about a level of inspiration in those organizations. So conscious capitalism and conscious business, inspirational leadership, all perhaps meaning the same sort of thing. It's really about, can we serve others, can we love them, and can we inspire them?
Thank you so much, Lance, and welcome today. Next, I'd like to go to Oziama. Welcome. And what does conscious business mean to you, and how did you get here today?
Oh, thank you, Kristen. For me, conscious business is really about a business that has awakened to its full potential, to its role in the world, to possibility, and is actively engaged in making a meaningful difference. And the way that I have been, I would say, my invitation to the realm that is conscious business really started off when I was actually working as a vice president in strategy. And I believe we were working on a telecommunications company, and the creative director, I'd handed him the strategic brief, and he kind of shook his head, and he was like, it's such a shame. And I didn't understand what he meant. I thought, oh, I guess he doesn't like the strategic brief. I guess I didn't hit the mark. And he said, your kind of mind should be used for helping to solve the world's problems. It's such a shame that you're only using it to help sell more phones. And at that time, it really didn't dawn on me the power and the promise of a different modality, a different way of being and doing. But when I decided, after having worked for a number of years in corporate America, that it was time for me to take some time out and to really dedicate towards what I call the larger evolutionary shift that I felt was emerging, I started off as really kind of doing the regular business coaching, and then I arrived on this concept, this approach that I like to term as transformational impact strategy, which is about how do we create these transformational shifts that not only transform the internal environments, right? So the employee engagement domain, but also the way in which we deliver value to customers, and then overall the trajectory that business is on. And that has been further refined while I was teaching. For 5 years, I taught at Columbia University at the master's level. I taught a course called Developing and Implementing Ideas. I've coached and worked and consulted with Fortune 500 companies, as well as small business owners, in Brooklyn, because I believe that every single entity that is working within the domain of business has a role to play. But I would say the key moment that really, really ignited me is after I had left corporate America and I started to do a lot of speaking and working at the United Nations. And there were many, this is right before the SDGs emerged. And it was as the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, were starting to turn over and we were starting to develop the foundational fodder and information. It almost seemed like civil society and all of that domain was looking to business to play a bigger role, wanting businesses to step into this domain and make a meaningful difference, but also realizing that if true change is going to really happen, like that kind of step change kind of change, that the business world was going to play a meaningful role in that. And I was all for it. And so the past, I would say, 4 to 5 years of my professional realm after having left the world as a vice president on Madison Avenue has been dedicated to supporting individuals and very much the world of business, as well as communities and global platforms to support this shift.
Thank you, Oziama. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you. And I also didn't mention that I also teach. I'm part of the faculty for the Conscious Business community as well, too. So the Conscious Business Initiative. And that's also been a pleasure teaching and training and supporting the work.
Thank you. Thank you. And next we'll go to Raj. Welcome. I'd love to hear your version of conscious business. What does that mean to you and what brought you to it?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me here. And it's delightful to be with this group of people. For me, the journey was really as a frustrated marketing professor after teaching 20 years of marketing and strategy, where the traditional narrative around business as well as marketing really did not inspire me very much. And I had done a lot of work showing that it really doesn't work very well, especially in marketing. We spend a lot of money, but customer loyalty and trust were going down even as we're spending more. So I started a book called In Search of Marketing Excellence, and that actually led me to companies. I was searching for companies that didn't spend much but had very high customer loyalty and trust. And we actually discovered a whole other way of being in a set of companies, which was not only did their customers love and trust them, but so did their employees and their communities and their suppliers. And so they were really stakeholder-oriented. We also found that these companies had a reason for being. They weren't just another airline or just another grocery store. There was a reason why they existed. There was a passion. They were not a business with a mission. They were a mission with a business in a way. So the idea of higher purpose and stakeholder orientation were some of the common elements. And then we also discovered the leaders were different, that they cared about people and purpose and not just about power and ego and money. And they were really there to serve. They're servant leaders, or what we now call selfless leaders. They have transcended the self. And lastly, the cultures of these kinds of businesses are very different. They're rooted in trust and authenticity and transparency, but most importantly, caring for human beings and putting human beings at the center, and that being the highest value above profit and anything else. So these elements essentially became the pillars of how we now define conscious capitalism: higher purpose, stakeholder orientation. And each of these is different than the traditional narrative. So it's a higher purpose, it's not profit. Profit maximization is not the purpose. You need to be profitable, but that shouldn't be your purpose. Creating value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. Consciously looking to create value for each and looking at how their interests can go together. Having leaders, as I said, who care about people and purpose above profit and power, and caring cultures and cultures rooted in trust. So the conscious capitalism movement started about 2008. We now have chapters in 30 US cities and 12 or 13 other countries, including Australia, Brazil, Israel, UK, Spain, Chile, Portugal, Costa Rica, etc. So it's a growing movement alongside other movements such as some that are represented here of people who are seeing a higher potential for business. It's the most extraordinary and powerful instrument for collective social action and change and creating value. But it really has been used to a fraction of its potential because we've used it as a way of essentially using people rather than serving people. I think that's the big shift. It's like the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. I think that's a shift that we, as well as the entities that we create, are going through, of rising to that different plane of consciousness.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you for that. Marilyn, welcome. I'd love to hear what conscious business means to you and how you found yourself here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's fascinating to hear everybody's story because we all come about it differently. I started my life really on the other side, starting as somebody who was really at the mercy of a lot of unconscious business, being a child laborer, being from Hong Kong, being a girl in a very male-dominated society. So I really had the physical and emotional, spiritual experience of what it's like to have the nuts, have all the nuts. And through a series of circumstances that we don't have to go into now, I landed here in the United States with the burning desire to transform the world because I can see what it looks and feels like not to. And it's a result of unconscious business. And so I came into business truthfully with the mission to transform it. So all my success at work, which you so graciously outlined, really is just the result of my desire to be conscious, to transform the world for the good. So for me, conscious business is the only way. And I'm grateful to say that I have been able to be very successful at it. And so when I finally left what I thought was going to be business forever, when I left as CEO after I organized Aveda to be sold to Estée Lauder and keep it as an entity with still the values that we operated intact, I thought I was just going to go straight into 100% working on my foundation, which I started as foundation. As life always shows us that we don't have the final word. I thought I was starting the foundation, and I had so many more people come to me and say, how did you do what you did? You know, you ran a large global organization, yet at the same time you transformed the labor law in all apparel workers. That is something that was not expected for somebody to be able to do and still do good and do well at the same time. For me, what showed was that it was not hello, I just also lost you. Are you there?
Yes, we can still hear you, Marilyn. Oh. Yes.
Perfect.
And we can see you and hear you, yes.
Okay, I just lost everybody, but it's all right. But what happened was that in showing them that you can do good and do well, and it's not a marketing idea, it is truthfully what is for the good of the organization, it made a tremendous difference. It made the difference for me to be able now to do good, serve humanitarianly, which is what I thought my whole life should have been about. But now I have the credibility and the resources, financial as well as networking, which is most important, I think, and also the experience to take it and help other organizations. So now, of course, I speak globally as a keynote speaker primarily, as well as coaching top leaders in large organizations, how to transform their businesses to more of a conscious business. Everybody is on the gradation of somewhere of being what we would say traditional business and a conscious business. So I have the privilege to be able to help with people with that. At the same time, I still run my foundation. And the last 2.5 years, I decided, since I wasn't busy enough doing both of those and writing books about it, and which has also collaborated with other leading organizations and people on this whole project, is that I took on back another CEO position in another global company. So now I do all the things I just mentioned. Plus, also I run a global health and healing company, which is based in Toronto, Canada, and I'm based, as you know, in California. But then magic of global companies is we can be anywhere. So, and I'm now able to help other businesses, coach leaders in businesses, still continue my writing and sharing from that area, as well as lead another business to show another example of how a conscious business can really make a difference. Since I've been with the company in 2.5 years, we've doubled the revenue. At the same time, even elevated more the consciousness of the organization. And it was a very conscious organization. I can't say that I brought that to it. That's what attracted me to it. So I guess my life is about how to show not only other people how to do it, but how I can be an example of what it looks like when we do that.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank each of you. Humanities team has started with Conscious Business as part of the Conscious Business Alliance, which published the Conscious Business Declaration in 2015. And that declaration articulates essential principles like those that you've shared here. And we believe that dramatically, these principles will increase the prosperity and the healing of the environment and improving human well-being. The Declaration calls for radical shift in perspective from business globally, one that is already shared by humanity's leading spiritual traditions and validated by modern science and modern business, as we've heard here today. It's expressed in the first principle. It says, "We are one with humanity and all of life. Business and all institutions of the human community are integral parts of a singular reality, interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent." The Declaration aims to define a new standard of business in the 21st century, one that will enable business to become the most powerful engine on earth for creating abundance and flourishing for humanity and all of life. Please find the link to the Conscious Business Declaration on the Global Oneness Summit.org webpage, where you may read it and sign it and become one of the thousands of signatories like our panelists here today. Back to our panels. At this time, I'd like to hear from each of you. Let's start with Oziama, and the word community comes to mind when I think about you, Oziama, and your work in the world. Can you share what a conscious community is, or some of what are you doing with community and conscious business?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, it's interesting because it was never the intention to become kind of the expert in quote unquote community. But I think a lot of people speak about the work that I've done in a particular city called Newburgh, New York, as well as the consulting that I've done with other organizations that are seeking to help to kind of strengthen and cultivate a sense of community within their organizations. So for me, when I speak about community building, I tend to refer to a rubric that I kind of like to refer to as the 4 R's. And I always speak about, whether it's a Newburgh, whether it's a Fortune 500 company, or it's a small business with their, 4 employees, it's always important what I call about reaching for the realm. The first R is this idea of the realm, right? What is the territory? What is that desired future that we all collectively are working towards, and that we want to believe in, and that we're holding up, that we're all collectively reaching for? And then I speak a lot about the rituals, right? What are the rituals that have to be installed and that have to be cultivated within the community so that we feel like we are one, that we feel like we're actually participating and co-creating experiences that create a closer bond. And again, this can be done whether you're talking about a tangible place or you're speaking about cultivating community online. Then I speak about relationships and the importance of, what are the relationships that need to be fostered within the system, and the way in which, the community itself interacts with other communities, and how do we cultivate and nourish those relationships. And then finally, the last R is this notion of reality. I think a lot of times, when we talk about whether it's organizational change efforts, or we talk about even marketing strategies, sometimes they're not rooted in a sense of reality, the reality of your customer, your client, your community, and what are the real challenges that people are facing, and that your organization may be facing at that point in time, and how does that all dance with the larger notion of community. But specifically with Newburgh, New York, and as it relates to conscious business, most recently what I've been doing is really, when you're talking about whether, people love to throw this word around, gentrification or, development without the displacement or so on and so forth, and the role that business can play, whether, in helping to create a healthy environment. What I've been doing is supporting a lot of the businesses to become more conscious, to actually, institute practices that tie them closer to the community, as well as consulting with organizations on how can they come into communities and make a meaningful difference. And a lot of times these communities that I'm working with at times have issues of violence, issues of where trust has been atrophied. And how do you actually cultivate and nourish a stronger sense of trust, so that people trust your business to do business with it, to frequent it, so that your business becomes a community-oriented business, not only from what's happening within the business itself, but how it interacts with the environment that it finds itself, and how can it make a meaningful difference that actually not only is just for, the momentary, that moment, but actually leaves a deep legacy, a memory imprint that people will talk about. And we know that the more that we create these rituals, the more that it creates more of a closer relationship, and people want to purchase from your business. People see your business as part of a major contribution. I think when we talk about conscious business, that's what we want. We want businesses that have woken up to what I like to talk about as it relates to the situation of our world, the situation of the moment, as well as the solution, how your business makes a meaningful contribution as a solution-oriented business. And in the larger story, how the business as a conscious business sees itself as a larger narrative that's unfolding locally and globally. And so that's kind of the realm as it relates to the work that I've been doing with communities, and it continues to evolve.
Thank you, Osiama. Very interesting work. I'd like to go to you next, Lance, and I'm curious about, I recall a conversation where you said something about the evolution, the fact that coming into consciousness, this we move through and we move forward, and maybe in some of the books that you have written, how you can really realize the evolution of your consciousness through your time. And maybe you could speak a little bit to what that is for each of us as individuals and leading organizations, inspiring, how this feels like a very ongoing process, or not just kind of done and check it off the list, so to speak.
You're so right. You mentioned earlier I've written 15 books, and I actually the other day wasn't sure what the number was, so I went through the list, and it actually turns out to be 19. But I don't say that to be boastful, but rather to tell you that I'm quite proud of about 3 or 4 of them. I'm extremely unhappy with about 7 or 8 of them, and I hope that most of them will be out of print and you won't be able to read them, because since I first started writing, I've learned a lot. And I realized that so much of what I thought I knew was not right. And so I've evolved a lot myself in my thinking. The more I watch and the more I learn, the more that seems to happen for me. There are some things that I've really become very, very clear about. First of all, let's be aware that in an unconscious business, the main theory that drives that business is motivation. It's the underpinning concept that drives everything in the organization. And motivation is a fear-based system. And if you think about it, there isn't a part of our society that doesn't use this as a fundamental driver. Think about marketing. Buy this product or you'll be ugly. Think about healthcare. Follow this protocol or you'll die. Think about business. Do what I say or I'll fire you. Think about politics. Vote for me or the bad guys will get you. Think about religion. Join my faith or you'll go to hell. And I can go on through all of the different parts of our society, and you'll see the fundamentals are the same. Leadership theory has been underpinned by fear and motivation, rewards and punishments. Very old thinking. It comes from the early part of last century and even the late part of the century before that, with people like Carl Jung and the behavioral scientists, B.F. Skinner and so on, Pavlov. Very essentially, we're doing the very same thing as they did, except it's more sophisticated. And the big discovery I made was that there's actually a different way of looking at this, and it's called inspiration. And the difference between motivation and inspiration is significant. We typically use motivation to either bribe someone, like a sales quota or a profit-sharing plan or a stock plan or whatever it might be, or punish them, like firing them or reducing their budgets or whatever. But inspiration is not fear-based, it's love-based. the guides that we've had in our lives were people who loved us. They didn't motivate us. They loved us. They wanted us to succeed and do well. And it was about an inner force. The way I describe the difference is that motivation is lighting a fire under someone, and inspiration is lighting a fire within someone. So there are some steps, as you say, in the evolution of this. And let me run through them quickly. So the first thing we have to do is inspire ourselves. We really can't inspire other people unless we're inspired. And there are ways in which we can do that. And one of them is to have a very clear understanding of who we are, why we're here, what our place on the planet is. The second is to have a dream. So one of the things I do, for example, with organizations, I take a look at their mission, vision, and value statements and ask them if you can remember them, if you can even find them, are you living them? And mostly the answer to those three questions is no. So we replace that with a dream. Similarly, some of the practices that we do in business are really archaic and don't work and aren't inspiring. For example, the performance review. Now, I often ask the $64,000 question here, what would you do if you took this idea at home? Would you do this with your spouse? Would you sit down with your spouse and say, hi, honey, it's time for our annual review. I'm going to go through a few things with you. We're going to talk about key performance indicators and your budget and some quotas. You would last about 2 seconds. So there are many things like this that we do in business, mission statements, value statements, and so on, which are so archaic and so uninspiring that we have to change them. So the book, the last one book that I wrote is called The Spark, the Flame, and the Torch. And the idea here is the spark, we have to inspire ourselves. The flame, we inspire others. And the torch, we inspire the world. It's in the end all about inspiration. So conscious business is about an inspired business with inspired people and inspired customers. And the reason people interconnect with them, either whether they're buyers or whether they're employees or whether they're vendors, is because they're inspired. And if you think about it, inspiration is the reason we do everything. We fall in love with people that inspire us. We smell a rose because it's inspiring to us. We go to a movie that inspires us. We eat in restaurants that inspire us. We hang out with friends that inspire us. And the interesting thing is that when we are no longer inspired by any of those, we leave them. That's why we leave companies. That's why we leave marriages. So inspiration is, for me, the key idea in the conscious business, and it's not motivation. So the evolution is moving from motivation, not that that's a bad thing, because there are times when we need to motivate, like if this room catches fire, I'll motivate you to get out of here. But what we need to become experts in is inspiration, and we know very little about it. We know a lot about motivation.
Thank you so much, Lance. I appreciate that dialogue and your work in the world so much. Next, I'd like to go to Marilyn. Marilyn, there is this quote here that says you're the business, ethics in business. And I'm just curious, what does that mean? What does that mean when we talk about conscious business and being ethical? It seems like it would be synonymous, but obviously every word has its own nuance. So I'm just curious your take on what that really means to you and how that relates to the conscious business journey.
Thank you. It's really something passionate for me. And you're right, there is a difference, it seems like, between what we consider ethical, meaning we don't hurt anybody that we know of. How many layers do we go out? And if we look a little further, a lot of traditional conventional businesses actually hurt other people, and not only just people, but the planet and everything else. And so when I would receive this notification that I was rated as one of the top 4 most ethical business, whatever the title was, I was actually surprised. I never applied for it or anything. It came completely out of the blue. And so I really had to think, what does it mean? Why did I get this? And what was that about? It's because I think I've always run anything I've done, whether it's a for-profit or non-profit, with in the Native Americans, they talk about 7 generations. I took a look at the difference. Does it impact anything else that I can touch in some way? And I don't mean physically, but just energetically throughout the supply chain. So we're talking about things that really make a difference for I think everyone. So I look at it in the sense of having been on the other side, being a child laborer. So if we say, we pay the standard wages of whatever place we're working in, but is that living wage? We start adhering to the age limits that they do in that country, but is that really reasonable? So we ask the harder questions. What we buy has not been sourced from something that has used child labor or slave labor or known pollutants. But what about the suppliers or the people who work with those people? So we take the bigger question of the impact. And when we support this particular organization, what are their values? So are they supporting something that we would not be happy with if the tables were turned? So the question is much bigger. And I'm grateful to say nowadays, these same questions are being asked by our consumers around the world more and more. What is the bigger impact of what we are consuming? What is the bigger impact of what we're producing? So for me, ethical means much more than I didn't hurt anybody that I know of in my immediate circle in doing whatever it is. How does it ripple out the whole way to the planet and even beyond?
Thank you. So ethics in the whole supply chain from beginning to end, not just in your office and the people that you're encountering, for example. Thank you, Marilyn.
I just do want to add, and also the consumer. Are we making a product that is going to hurt people,
Sure.
even though we might say it's, they're asking for it? That's not a good enough answer. It's like, is this something that truthfully is serving them?
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Thank you for the explanation. And Raj, now to you. Conscious capitalism is, of course, pretty well known. And at the same time, I don't know if I asked 3 people on the streets or even in Conscious Business Initiative if they would answer it the same way. So I'd love to hear more about how that term came about for you. I really love the story of going from marketing and moving marketing into something more conscious. So conscious capitalism to me sounds a little bit more like a financial term. And I'm just curious from your standpoint, the difference between marketing, finance, capitalism, consciousness, how does that all come together? How would you help us understand what you do and what conscious capitalism is all about a little better? Thank you.
Sure. So just to clarify, I mean, the fact that I came out of marketing doesn't mean that this is really about marketing. So that book, which started as a marketing study, it eventually ended up being called Firms of Endearment. It was about companies that are loved by all of their stakeholders. And it had nothing to do with marketing other than the fact that these kinds of businesses generally don't need to engage in a lot of paid marketing because they get the benefit of free word of mouth, not only from customers, but also from employees and communities and the media, and the whole world kind of roots for their success in some ways. And the other thing that we found was that these companies actually outperform financially. So even though they're not setting out to maximize profits or just resolutely focus on shareholder value, they actually outperformed in that particular study 9-1 over a 10-year period. So this wasn't a trade-off between being a good business with purpose and taking care of stakeholders versus making money. Actually, that is the better route. And I think a lot of us probably have that experience on this panel, that is in fact the right way to go about things, and that when you focus on right actions, good outcomes will evolve. But if you focus on a predetermined outcome, you're going to undertake actions that are going to hurt, as Marilyn said. So that's the evolution. And then we got into conscious capitalism, and the way that happened, I met John Mackey, the founder and CEO of Whole Foods, who had loved that book, and we had dinner. And my vision was for something I was calling the Institute for New Capitalism, because this was a very different philosophy than everything that I had been taught, and indeed that I had been teaching, reluctantly, but had been teaching as a business school professor, that business is all about profits, and it's a dog-eat-dog world, and it's not personal, it's business, and all of the cliches that make business really like another form of war, right? I mean, a lot of our thinking and our frameworks for business came out of military. Strategy and tactics and operations and command and control and hierarchy and headquarters and all of that. So we really need to break away from that way of thinking. When I showed that to John Mackey, he said, this is exactly my vision for what I want to do, but we call it conscious capitalism. And he, in fact, did not coin the phrase either. It was Muhammad Yunus, the founder of the Grameen Bank and the inventor, as far as we know, of the micro-lending concept. But this was 97, I think. But he was using it to refer to what today we would call a social business that only has a social purpose. and any profits, any surplus is reinvested back into that purpose. We are applying it more broadly to say that every business should have society as a key, in fact, a primary stakeholder. We need to be on the right side of society. We cannot be part of the problem. We need to be part of the solution as a business. And secondly, we recognize that having financial returns is actually a very important thing, that profits are a social good. That is socially irresponsible in some ways not to be profitable, because you're using resources, you're not generating a surplus. And that's what business is uniquely able to do, is take a certain amount of input and then actually have much more output from that. So, creating that surplus is important, because without profits, we don't have taxes and we don't have infrastructure, we don't have public spending on all kinds of things. So profits are essential, but it matters how you make the money. It matters a great deal. Because you can squeeze profits by squeezing people and squeezing customers, employees, suppliers, the environment, communities, push costs into the future, externalize all of the burdens of our business. Or we can create business in such a way that we create a spectrum of positive effects, financial wealth, but also intellectual capital, social capital, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, physical well-being, positive impact on the culture, and positive impact on the environment. And having a spectrum of positive effects is possible. And the traditional way says you're all about making money and everything else is a side effect. Well, the reality is there's no such thing called a side effect. We do things and there are effects. And for too long, business has operated under this idea that we're just about making money and everything else that happens is forgiven because that's how you make money. It's not personal, it's business, etc. And that is simply unacceptable. We cannot accept, we cannot absorb, we cannot afford the so-called side effects of traditional business. So even though the phrase conscious capitalism seems to evoke the financial side of things, in reality what we're saying, capitalism is a system that was rooted in freedom and voluntary exchange and human beings pursuing their own perceived self-interest. But we need to evolve that because we left out a very important dimension of what it means to be a human being, which is the need to care. Right? Adam Smith wrote another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which was all about that. But we focused just on the wealth of nations, which was more about self-interest. But these two things together, and now I think increasingly a third pillar would be a drive towards purpose. More and more people want to have a purposeful life. It's not just about thriving or surviving or even flourishing. It's about having meaning and purpose. So those are now, it's a multidimensional view of human beings. And that's really the higher consciousness with which we now want to use this system of capitalism. It is a very important societal institution. We can't afford to lose it, right? Because there's a flirtation out there with socialism now, and a lot of the young people and millennials, I think a high percentage, majority of them would prefer that, they think, but they don't actually know what that system entails and what it actually does in society. So I think getting the dynamism that capitalism gives us along with the decency that socialism promises but actually doesn't deliver. Can we have dynamism with decency? And in fact, I believe conscious capitalism gives you greater dynamism than traditional capitalism because more people are inspired, as Lance said, and they're far more creative and engage in breakthrough thinking and care for others better. And we can have true decency in the sense of truly putting people at the center and elevating human flourishing above all else. So that I hope that's answered your question. I think that's explaining a little more why this phrase conscious capitalism and what we mean by it.
Yeah, thank you, Raj. Thank you. I think the question that's really coming through for me at this point is I think about conscious business and someone listening to this call says, well, where can I start? And there's a lot of different perspectives starting, if the leader of the organization isn't conscious, the whole thing's not going to be conscious. Oh no, it's a grassroots effort. You can start from the bottom and go up. Oh no, this, that, the other. So since it seems to be a real open field, right? There is no one way. Like you said, everything is connected. I'm just curious from each one of you. Raj, I'll go back to you since you were just speaking. If you're going into a business, you're looking at a business, and for you, where would you start with helping a business be more conscious? What do you think is the first place?
Yeah. Well, I've had a fair amount of experience with this successfully and unsuccessfully as well, and I've come to realize, as you just said, that the consciousness of the leader places an upper limit on the consciousness of the organization that can exist. So if I get the sense from a leader who may have seen our financial performance data and said, oh, wow, that's going to make more money, so we're going to do this. And I would say, if you're doing it for that reason, it probably won't work. You have to do this for the right reasons, because it elevates people. Right? It creates value for everybody and doesn't have victims and losers. It's a win-win approach. So if I get the sense that a leader is not there, their consciousness is still at that level of survival and success, right? Only, and not really looking at meaning and purpose and ultimately service to humanity, that it's not going to work. And I've seen organizations where there are pockets of the organization because there's a division or a branch that has a leader of this kind, and they'll create an oasis of consciousness and flourishing within that. But that doesn't last, and that doesn't, it doesn't trickle up, and it doesn't trickle sideways. Typically, when that person is gone, that thing is gone as well. So this, unfortunately, is a kind of thing that has to emanate from leadership. Leadership matters more than ever, because leaders now have the power to bring something like this about. Now, if they do, then we know that this is not an uphill battle. This is not something that people are resistant to. Once you get past their natural cynicism, because they've experienced many other things in the past that haven't really been true to what people say what they were. But once you get past that, people are really hungry and waiting. Everybody wants meaning and purpose. Everybody wants to be able to be their authentic self, their human self at work. Right? So all of these things are naturally aligned with what human beings are craving. And the journey then becomes a really joyful one. We're doing that with a big company right now, a $30 billion company in the petrochemicals area. And they're discovering a higher purpose. And once you have that leader or that kind of leadership mentality in place, then you start with the question around why do we exist? We start with purpose. As Simon Sinek's book said, start with why. I think that is an essential question. So why does the world need this company? What would be missed if we disappeared? What's our reason for being? And there's a process of how you do that. We do have a book that we finished. It's coming out in a few months. It's called The Conscious Capitalism Field Guide, which is exactly around this question. How do you implement conscious capitalism in any kind of business? Starting with where you are today and then implementing those 4 pillars over time.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you. I'd like to go next to Lance with this same question. I know your bio talks about inspiring leaders, right? Teaching leaders, inspiring. And I'm just curious, where do you stand on the leader must be the starting point versus can it start with the team? Can it start as a grassroots through the organization? What's your perspective on how best to start with conscious business within a business?
I think the answer is yes. I think you can start anywhere. And there's an easy answer, not a simple answer, but not an easy one, which is one starts with oneself. Because I think what always seems to happen is that we want to start with someone else. They need to change. They need to get it. They need to be different. This is probably true, but if you're not different, then we're not really in a very good position to try and inspire someone else to be different. So I think it does start with oneself. Now, I've worked in all kinds of companies, and I've seen it work in just about every way you can think of. Like Raj, I've also seen it not work a lot too. And to put a little piece of sobriety into this conversation, I have looked at clients that I've worked with over years to see how long will it last? And the maximum time I've seen is 12 years. Now, what I mean by that is that this was a very large furniture company, one of the biggest in the country that we worked with. And when the recession came in 2008, everything fell out the window. And everything we'd been working on, everything we'd built was remarkable, but it suddenly got jettisoned, and some old story ideas started to be put into place, for example, like firing people to cut the cost down and so on. So 12 years is the maximum. They're back now, re-energizing with what they were doing before, but it was an ugly period. So I think the reality is, if we can get 12 years of inspired, conscious business, we should be grateful for that. That's better than none by a long way. And if we can learn how to make it a little longer than 12 years, that'll be fantastic too. Now, can it start with little teams in some remote part of the organization? Absolutely. I'm working with a giant German manufacturing company right now, And one of the leaders in a small plant in Mexico is making such a big difference there that it's going to catch fire and move across the entire organization. And that's another way in which it works, because they look at that little plant in Mexico and they say, wow, that's really fantastic what they're doing there. Let's go and have a look and see what's happening. And if we can, we'll copy it, and then we'll scale it up to the whole system. And then on the other hand, you have leaders who say, I want to run a different kind of company. It's important to me, and I love what Raj said, that the upper limit of conscious business is the upper limit of the leaders' awareness about conscious business. You can't much go past that, even if you have magical departments that are doing amazing things. So in the end, it all has to work. And I have seen situations where the leader leaves and everything falls apart. I've seen a situation where a department that's on fire and inspired gets shut down or moved, or the leader of it changes and it all falls apart. So it reminds me of the guy at the fair, who's got lots of sticks and plates on all of them, and he's spinning them all. And you have 10 of them, and you spin the first one, and you get to the end, and then the first one starts falling off, so you have to rush back and spin the last one again, and so it goes. It's a constant effort to keep people inspired. And I can tell you one of the main reasons why it's so difficult is that the other way is easy. It's easy to pollute the environment. It's easy to throw your Coke can out of the car window and say, to heck with it. That's an easy way to do things. It's easy to shout at somebody or to yell at them or to be abusive. It's easy to cut corners. It's easy to cheat customers. These are the easy routes. It's much, much harder to take time, slow down. And I think I'll just wrap up by saying, repeating a wonderful quote by Robert Greenleaf. It's one of my favorites. He says, will what I'm about to say improve on the silence? I think if we can use that as a guide for everything we're doing, we'll build great companies.
Thank you, Lance. It reminds me of, I think, how I've heard it. If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Yeah, fabulous. What a great. So if you can't inspire your colleagues, don't do anything at all, almost is the parallel I'm hearing there. Thank you for that. And Marilyn, you've had success with so many different leadership roles and so many different companies. I'm curious your perspective from maybe the leadership, how to engage the rest of the team. Like what might leaders who are listening to this call gain by your wisdom in that and in the different roles that you've had? How have you inspired others as a leader in these organizations?
Thank you. I was resonating so much with what Raj and Lance was saying about leadership versus, where do we start making the change? And then for you to ask me about what it means to be a leader and what difference that makes. It really is the crux of the situation. And how do we inspire people? Is by being truly authentic. Because now, especially in this age where we have so little physical contact, everybody's on their phone almost all the time, some kind of device. When we do have that human interaction, even if it's on a computer like we are on now, when we talk from a place of authenticity, it shows through. And I would say one of my best compliments I ever gotten from someone who used to work for me, and I didn't even get it directly, was 20 years later, after I worked with this particular man, I ran to somebody else, just so happened in some social gathering that I did not even know. And this woman was living in Maine or Vermont, very far from where I was. And she said, oh, you're Marilyn Tam. And I'm thinking, well, maybe she read a book of mine or something. No, she said, do you remember this person? His first name is Phil. And I said, of course, I worked with him 20 years ago. And she said, he tells me you're a living, walking, talking heart. And I thought, wow. By the way, we were very successful with the business we're doing and everything else. But 20 years later, somebody would say that to me. That to me meant that I really inspired them because I came from my truth, I came from my honesty. But more than that, I got their hearts activated because nobody's going to tell somebody else about somebody 20 years ago about their heart if they didn't get moved, if their hearts didn't get moved. And then we found a common purpose. And in that common purpose, the organization and flourished. And truthfully, that's really what we're talking about, is how do we get that inspiration by coming from what is real for us? And then also to make sure it's measured. Because a lot of times we inspire people, we tell them all this great motivating, sorry for the word, Lance, but motivating as well as inspiring type of work. At the same time, we measure and promote and give them salary increases on completely different things. We have to be consistent as a leader. So we say, this is what's important. Let's reward with that. And also reward it in how we measure the productivity and success of the organization. When we combine all that, then we're truly inspiring, because we're walking our talk in every aspect of our lives.
Thank you for that. And what I love is when you talk about the word heart here at the Conscious Business Initiative. I feel that each of the certified change agents, or anyone who's gone through the program, they're the heart of change, right? It's bringing your heart where you are and resonating that out. Thank you for that. Oziama, last but not least, again, back to this idea of community. It feels like the number of organizations, the type of different aspects in society that you have put together is really unique for this group here. And maybe you can speak a little to how do you work with all these different factions and bring them together in this conscious business way?
It's really interesting because, a lot of people, they wondered how I was going to be able to navigate and build my consultancy on working on the individual level, the business level, the community level. And specifically to what we've been speaking about, I resonate with what everyone said thus far in terms of how do we actually address the leadership component, and then also, the elements of the people who are actually a part of helping to make that change and making it a lived reality. And what comes to mind is a specific engagement when I was asked by a CEO of an organization to kind of help support the engagement and the shift on that level. And I do believe that it can happen. I mean, you always have to have that higher level, leadership buy-in and sign off and engagement at that level. But I also do believe that it comes down to something that we haven't spoken about yet, which is design. And the way in which we design and support the way in which we can actually support the activation of the employees as well as the awakening at the top levels. And I remember, this specific engagement was about helping the actual employees identify the community culture. And what is that organizational culture across multiple offices here in America and in Europe? And then from those practices and those mindsets, how do we then speak to the leaders and say, these are some of the elements that we believe are needed to change in order for us to have a healthier organization. And then on the other end, having the leaders wake up to their role and their behaviors and what needs to shift at that level. And so to me, the design of it, and when we have more, organizational engagements and interventions that really speak to what's happening on the ground and the lived reality, as well as a consciousness shift on both levels, I feel like we actually, we enhance our ability to create a meaningful difference because we're doing it on both levels, as opposed to expecting that it's only going to happen at the top level or that it's only going to happen in these enclaves. But when we design for a transformational and inspired approach that addresses both, I do believe that is going to make a more meaningful difference. That it's not just about the leader, although at the leadership level, we know that is the threshold. And we know that when we actually activate there, that there is a meaning, that there is a difference happening, that it's almost like the leader at that level does have the go, no go because of the role that they play, but we can't underestimate the way in which from that ground level, the impact that happens there and what can happen throughout the organization from activating, inspiring, and connecting and building community from that base.
Thank you. I like what you said. So it's more of a systematic approach from your perspective.
I do. And I think the role of transformational design and the role of using, leveraging inspiration, also still building motivation, but understanding that the role of transformation, the conversation of transformation, one thing we haven't spoken about is this notion of the transformation economy. And many people believing that we're moving into, as conscious business, leaders and in that movement, I do believe that this this narrative of the transformation economy and the role that businesses can play in ushering in a whole new level of engagement that is based off of transformational impact. I do believe that is where we're all headed, and the way in which business is going to change in order to deliver that level of transformation inside the organization to the customers and clients and throughout the world at large. I think that's where we're all headed.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for bringing in the word transformation, because certainly conscious business is a transformative process. And it's not always, like Lance said, it's not necessarily easy. And having that systemically understood throughout the organization that we are in a state of transformation. And by the way, sometimes it goes well, and other times we really have to sit in it and really hold each other through it, right? So I just am so thankful to have all of you here today in this rich conversation and all the different perspectives of conscious business, your backgrounds, your work in the world.
If you'd like to receive all of our new podcast episodes, please click on the subscribe button. To find out more about Humanities Team Transformational Education Programs and about how you can help support our mission, please visit us online at humanitiesteam.org, where you can also sign up for our email list so we can let you know about our free online events and other news about what we're up to each week. And again, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. Thank you.